ever look up at the night sky and just feel this, ugh, this itch, this fundamental urge to not just wonder about those distant lights, but to maybe, actually go there?
Yeah, absolutely. That feeling,
Yeah.
it's powerful.
And that core human desire wanting to seek out and maybe even settle other worlds, that's exactly what our sources are digging into today.
It is. And what's really captivating, I think, is how the material frames what we're doing right now, astronomically speaking. It's like it's presented as the very beginning of this huge map-making project.
Map making, how so?
Oh, like we're the old explorers, sketching the first rough coastlines of these exoplanetary systems. We're basically doing the initial surveys, charting potential territory for future generations.
Huh. I like that. It gives what we're doing now, all the data gathering, a real sense of purpose, doesn't it? Not just numbers, but first steps on a massive journey.
Exactly. And the sources really point to that deep-seated human drive behind it all, that urge to explore. I mean, think about the earliest human migrations out of Africa.
Right, that constant push, just got to see what's over the next hill or across that sea. It seems baked into us.
It does. And digging a bit deeper, it's not just curiosity, is it? The material we looked at really highlights the pull of opportunity.
Opportunity like?
Well, the potential for new resources, maybe, or the chance to build something new, perhaps even better societies somewhere else entirely. It's the kind of inherent human optimism, maybe, believing there's a better future out there.
Yeah, that makes sense. But then there's also a really practical, maybe even a bit sobering reason, right? The whole eggs in one basket argument.
Definitely. The universe, as our sources point out pretty clearly, isn't always friendly. Asteroid impacts, gamma ray bursts, nearby supernovas. These aren't just, movie plots.
They're real threats, existential ones.
Precisely. So spreading humanity beyond Earth, it starts to look like a kind of planetary insurance policy. A way to maybe ensure our long-term survival as a species.
Okay, so we have the urge, the optimism, and this survival instinct driving us outwards. But as soon as we start thinking seriously about going, it throws up a massive ethical question, doesn't it?
It really does. The sources bring this up quite strongly. What if there's already life there on these other worlds? Maybe entire ecosystems, maybe even, developing civilizations.
That stops you in your tracks thinking about it.
It forces us to ask, okay, if we're explorers, what are our responsibilities? Do we just barge in?
Yeah, I mean, imagine finding a world just teeming with life, even if it's simple microbes. What's our role then? Do we have the right to potentially mess that up by being there? Or worse, by trying to, terraform or colonize?
It's a huge consideration.
Yeah.
It really makes you question our place, potentially, in a much bigger cosmic picture.
Yeah.
What impact do our ambitions have beyond ourselves?
Okay, so hold that ethical thought for a moment. Let's shift from the why we might want to go to the how. Because, wow, the practical challenges highlighted in the material are just staggering.
They really are. The distances involved, they're almost impossible to truly comprehend. Proxima Centauri b, that's our closest exoplanet neighbor.
Yeah, about 4.2 light years away sounds manageable until you think about light speed.
Exactly. And the sources emphasize, even with the fastest chemical rockets we have now, or can realistically imagine in the near future, getting there would take thousands of years.
Thousands. Okay, so that definitely puts a pin in the idea of, booking a weekend trip to another star system anytime soon.
Not quite. It's way beyond a single human lifespan, or even many generations.
So how on Earth, or off Earth, I guess, do we even start to think about bridging that gap? The sources must touch on some potential solutions, right? Even theoretical ones.
They do. And some are pretty out there, starting with robotic exploration, but maybe not how you'd first picture it.
Meaning, not big Voyager-style probes.
Well, maybe eventually. But the sources focus on something much, much smaller. The idea of using incredibly lightweight spacecraft pushed by light itself. Huge, super thin sails catching sunlight, or, more likely, powerful laser beams from Earth.
Light sails. Okay, I've heard of that. But
Right.
What kind of spacecraft are we talking about?
Think tiny. Payloads measured in micrograms, like little chipsets. Basically, sensors and maybe some processing power, perhaps even a rudimentary AI. The sources mention something maybe like a very basic ChatGPT precursor crammed onto a chip the size of a stamp.
Micrograms. Wow, so you could send potentially millions of them.
Potentially. Acting as our remote scouts, our eyes and ears, sending back data across the void. It's a way to explore without sending people.
Right, because sending people that way, I'm guessing that's a no-go.
Completely infeasible, according to the material. The mass of a human plus life support shielding. Just orders and orders of magnitude too heavy for light sail propulsion as we currently conceive it.
Okay, so tiny robots, yes, humans, no. That leads to, well, where does that leave human expansion?
This is where the sources get into some really long-term, maybe even slightly unsettling concepts, like sending frozen human embryos.
Whoa, okay. Elaborate on that.
The idea is you transport the genetic material, maybe even embryos genetically tweaked, to better suit the target environment frozen. And you send along complex robotic systems
Robotic systems to do what?
to gestate the embryos upon arrival, to raise the resulting humans. Basically, robotic nannies and incubators setting up the first generation on an exoplanet.
That sounds straight out of science fiction.
It does. The material actually references the TV series Raised by Wolves as a kind of pop culture exploration of this exact idea, sending embryos raised by androids on a new world.
Huh. That really pushes the definition of colonization, doesn't it? And raises so many questions about what a human presence even means if they're, well, raised by machines light years away.
Absolutely. And that's before we even get to the environments themselves. The sources keep coming back to just how little we actually know about what these exoplanets are truly like.
Beyond the basics, you mean, like size and orbit.
Exactly. We have mass, radius, orbital period for many. But the actual conditions, huge unknowns. The material points out, for instance, that many of these super-Earths, or mini-Neptune's planets, bigger than Earth but smaller than Neptune, might not even have a solid surface.
No solid surface, like gas giants.
Not quite like Jupiter, but maybe worlds that are mostly fluid or have incredibly dense atmospheres crushing down onto some kind of weird high-pressure ocean or core. Not exactly somewhere you can just, build a settlement.
Right. Landing would be tricky or impossible.
Potentially impossible.
Right.
And it's not just the ground or lack of it. The sources also talk about gravity. Some of these worlds could have surface gravity many times Earth's. Imagine living under, say, 3 Gs constantly. The physical toll would be immense.
Yeah, our bodies aren't built for that long term.
Not at all. And then you've got weird situations like exomoons orbiting giant planets. They might be tidally locked, maybe bathed in constant light reflected from their parent planet. How would life, a biosphere, even evolve under those conditions? It's so different from Earth's day-night cycle.
It really underlines how alien these places could be in ways we can barely imagine.
Totally. And linking that back to the human side, thinking long-term, the sources touch on the cultural implications of spreading out so far.
How so?
Well, the sheer distances. We're talking potentially thousands of light years between settlements. Communication becomes incredibly delayed, centuries, maybe millennia, for a round-trip message.
So contact would be almost meaningless over those timescales.
Pretty much. And that could lead to a profound fragmentation of human civilization. Could a unified culture survive that? Could knowledge of our origins, of Earth itself, even be maintained?
It might just fade into myth, right? The sources mention Dune in that context, where the original homeworld is legendary, almost forgotten.
Exactly that kind of scenario. You could end up with entirely separate human civilizations developing in complete isolation, potentially unrecognizable to each other after enough time.
It paints a picture less of a unified human future among the stars and more of scattered islands of humanity.
Or, if we do encounter other life, the sources suggest it might not be one big galactic empire, but maybe more like a diverse menagerie of civilizations. Lots of different species at different stages, evolving largely on their own.
A much more complex, maybe messier galaxy than often pictured.
Seems likely, if life is common.
Yeah.
Which brings us back to the near-term versus the far-term view in the sources.
Okay, what's the distinction they draw?
Essentially, that human expansion within our own solar system, Mars, the moon, maybe asteroids is challenging, but feels achievable. It's a matter of engineering and will, perhaps.
Right. The distances are manageable, relatively speaking.
But true interstellar travel for humans. The sources paint that as facing absolutely monumental hurdles. The physics, the biology, the timescales. It's just a whole different order of difficulty.
So what's the more likely scenario for our presence beyond the solar system, at least initially?
The material suggests it's much more likely to be, well, proxies. AI agents, advanced robotic explorers, maybe even those remotely gestated humans we talked about earlier, acting as humanity's sort of presence and ambassadors out there.
So our first steps into the galaxy might not be our footprints, but maybe robotic ones, or ones belonging to humans who've never even seen Earth.
That seems to be the more plausible path based on the challenges outlined. Our minds, our technology, our genetic code might travel, even if our physical bodies, born on Earth, don't make the interstellar leap easily.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
Mm.
About the long-term future, the destiny of humanity in the cosmos. What does it even mean to be human when we're spread across such unimaginable voids, perhaps represented by AI or by beings biologically human but culturally utterly alien?
Exactly. It's a profound question to ponder. What's the essence of humanity when it's untethered from Earth and potentially embodied in such different forms? That's maybe the ultimate puzzle our interstellar ambitions force us to confront.